Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another installment of the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project's Stay Healthy at Home webinar series. Today's topic is working from home. So thank you for joining us for Working Hard or Hardly Working, Maintaining Your Well-Being and Productivity While Working from Home. Today's webinar will run from 2 to 3 p.m. And I'd like to jump right in because this is a webinar chock full of great information about our new normal, working from home, working remotely. So I welcome your questions and comments throughout the webinar. And I hope that if you have any feedback, you'll feel free to share that in our questions tab. So my name is Ashley Ritchey. I'm the director of the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project, which is a program of the ARC of New Jersey. My team and I provide statewide support to individual self-advocates as well as self-advocacy groups. We provide comprehensive training, information and referral services, and host major events throughout the state. And this is our newly established webinar series. So again, we're super grateful for everyone for tuning in today. This webinar series is part of our Healthy Lifestyles Project, which is a program dedicated to teaching students and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities about different aspects of health and wellness. So certainly a lot of what we're going to talk about today is maintaining boundaries, setting healthy boundaries, and using effective communication to maintain that much desired work-life balance. If you have any questions about the Healthy Lifestyles Project or how we can host a virtual training with your groups, feel free to get in touch. This is our website right at the bottom, healthylifestylesproject.org. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback throughout the presentation, just enter that information into the question box and we will make sure to address that. And we'll make sure to address the questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to send them in at any time. All right, I'd like to kick it off with a very quick poll, just to see where we're at today. So if you could, I'm going to launch the poll right now. Just let us know, are you identifying as a self-advocate, as a family member? Do you identify as a member of a direct support professional team, a support coordination agency, a state agency? Hopefully we've gathered some good categories here and you fit in, but if not, feel free to clarify in the question box and let us know where you're coming from or what area of services you identify with. Okay. Thank you for everyone who voted. 82% participation, that's fantastic. The majority of folks who are joining us today are coming from a support coordination agency or another, you're a member of an agency team supporting folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We've also got a great showing of direct support professionals and as well as family members, love it, self-advocates. And again, if anybody would like to clarify their position, oh, thank you, Christina, behavior support specialist, fantastic. Fantastic, guys, thanks for participating. I just like to get a feel for where everyone's coming from. So as I said, today we're going to cover professional boundaries in the era of COVID-19, our new normal. We're going to discuss work from home etiquette, as well as how to stay connected both personally and professionally during this time. We are also going to focus on ways to achieve that work-life balance that I think we're all kind of striving for, especially critical now during the stay-at-home order when we are spending most of our time at home. I think that we need to start off with a discussion around boundaries. For a lot of people, I think boundaries might be maybe an uncomfortable topic, let's say, just because some of us haven't been taught how to express our boundaries, or we may have a feeling that we should feel guilty for establishing boundaries. It just might not be a comfortable conversation for folks. So let's address it right off the bat. what is the purpose of establishing boundaries? It's generally to make sure everybody feels safe and comfortable in a certain situation or a certain environment. So, you may have heard the old saying, fences make the best neighbors. There's a reason that we put physical boundaries in place to maintain privacy, to keep an area out of bounds. And it gets a little bit more complex when we talk about things like emotional boundaries, kind of psychic boundaries. But in general, we all have boundaries. We all have lines at which, if they're crossed, if these imaginary boundaries are crossed, we do feel potentially unsafe or uncomfortable. So the more clearly that we can state our boundaries and the things that we're willing to accept in our lives and the things that we're comfortable with, the better. The less ambiguous, the better. We don't want people in our lives to have to guess the things that we're comfortable or not comfortable with. And generally speaking, boundaries kind of manifest in a lot of ways, but especially at work in a physical way. So when we do trainings for self-advocates, we always make it a point when discussing boundaries to say, the way that you greet a coworker or a boss is very different than the way that you would greet a family member. We can go through a routine of, you shake your hand versus give a relative a kiss on the cheek or a hug. And even in speaking about that with relatives and family members, it's important to express those physical boundaries if you're not comfortable with hugs and kisses on the cheek. Nowadays, I think people, are certainly socially distancing, so that's not really part of the conversation now. But it's important to express those physical boundaries just to make sure you are greeted in a way that you're comfortable with. And again, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say something like, I prefer a high five or a handshake. I'm not big on hugs. And certainly at work, we have cubicles, we have an office door that we may be able to close if we're discussing a sensitive topic. We're not sitting in the same chair as someone else. We have that elbow room built into our physical setting at work. Time. We have our day kind of broken up into different segments. We're expected to be certain places at certain times. This webinar from 2 to 3, and then I'm sure your day was packed with other activities. But again, this helps kind of plan our day out, plot our day out, and sets a boundary for other people to know, this is where I am at a certain point. I won't be able to be here or do this thing. We have our day kind of set that way as far as scheduling goes. Energy. What I mean by that is basically there are certain things that, there's only so much energy that we have in one day. And we have a lot of different things to accomplish, a lot of different tasks to complete. So we want to make sure that we're setting boundaries in terms of the energy that we put into different things. Generally speaking, we should only be doing maybe one thing at a time. I know that there is definite pressure to multitask. Especially, I find myself doing it, but I think, and we're going to discuss this a little more later, but bringing awareness to kind of what you're doing in the moment and why you're focusing on that task can help you kind of focus your energy on a particular thing. And again, you will not be expected or shouldn't expect yourself to be pulled in all these different directions. Set that boundary. And discussion topics. This is a big one that we talk about when doing trainings for self-advocates and staff. We know that there are certain things that are off limits when we're at work. There's things that we don't talk about. And again, it's okay to make a statement about the discussion topics that you will and won't entertain at work. So it's okay to state these things. There should be no guilt or shame associated with letting people know what your boundaries are. And again, I just think it's something that we can build into our everyday to make sure that we're safe and comfortable. So when we talk about communication, we want to make sure that, because communicating boundaries is a really, really effective way of creating and gaining that work-life balance. So communication is a super big part of establishing boundaries and letting people know where you're at. You want to make sure that before you enter into a conversation that could potentially be, emotional or is maybe discussing a topic that's really important to you, make sure your basic needs are met. So we've probably all heard of Maslow's hierarchy of need. We know that to be our most effective selves, there's certain things that we need. You want to make sure you're not entering into a really important conversation when you're super hungry or hangry. Generally, you don't want to enter into a conversation if you're super exhausted, if you feel pulled in 30 different directions at one time. That would mean that your basic need for just calm and focus is maybe not met at that time. So again, it is okay to schedule a time to talk. You should not feel that you have to have an important conversation in that very moment. It is okay to make sure that there's a mutually agreed upon time to have a discussion, whether it's about a boundary being crossed or about an important meeting that's coming up or something more family focused or personal. You also want to make sure that regardless of how the other person involved in the conversation is going to respond or present themselves, you can still decide to maintain a respectful demeanor. That's generally a huge part of our communication training, is that you cannot control how other people respond. You can't control how other people act. And acknowledging that and deciding that you're not going to waste time trying to change that other person is a really effective way to make sure that you focus on what you need and you get your point across in the way that you're comfortable with. I think it's also important to stick to one topic at a time. Again, avoid multitasking in a conversation. So this is certainly easier said than done, but it's helpful if you start off the conversation stating, I would like to discuss this topic. And then if you feel yourself being pulled, there's certainly nothing wrong with taking a note and just saying, I just want to write that down so I remember to come back to it later. But you generally want to stick to one topic at a time and remain in the present. It's not always helpful to bring up things that happened previously. Breathing through it. I love this tip. This is something I employ all the time. Our body likes to breathe. We like to breathe. And it's the quickest way to send signals to our brain to chill, to just chill out and give ourselves a second. And as I said before, it's okay to schedule a time to talk, especially if the topic is more charged and you might need more time to prepare for that. And generally, if someone is, respecting of you, whether it's a professional relationship, a personal relationship, they want you to be prepared and comfortable before they enter into the conversation too. We always say that you have the right to ask questions. That's how we learn. There's no purpose in pretending that you understand what someone's saying or that you understand where someone's coming from if you don't. If you respect that person, you want to make sure that you clarify what they're saying. So that could be as simple as just asking a question, can I ask you, when you said this, what does that mean? Or how can I help? There's just, it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. You can just, ask questions about things that you want to learn more about. And the last tip, follow up in writing. This really comes into play, I think, in more professional settings. Just because we're all, like I said, juggling these different roles throughout the day, different activities. We have a packed to-do list. If we talk to, say, a supervisor or a coworker about an important topic in person, or nowadays over video chat, it's always good if you don't receive a response within a couple business days to follow up in writing and just say, hey, I wanted to follow up about this thing we discussed. Here's a refresher. Here's what I was looking for. It's just helpful, I think, to keep everybody on track when we all have so much going on. Okay, so I found this cool little infographic online that I wanted to share with everybody. And I think that, it really sums up the things that we were talking about before, where we need boundaries in our emotional space and our material space. This is a big one. Especially when we're living with other people and our coworkers have become our children and our pets and our loved ones. We want to make sure that we're asking people before we immediately borrow something. And in terms of physical touch, these things come into place. You want to make sure that you're identifying things that make you uncomfortable and explicitly stating that. So I really like this one. If someone makes a joke that you're not comfortable with at work or otherwise, I don't find comments like that funny. It's plainly stated, lets them know that that is crossing a boundary. So yeah, I share this because I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to practice boundary setting, sometimes even before we enter into a work or personal experience. We have to know where we're at, and we have to know ourselves to know what kind of our triggers are in terms of boundary stepping. So as I said before, at work, boundaries do tend to be more clearly defined. In terms of office space, cubicles, things like that, even conference rooms. Everybody has their area, everybody has their elbow room, because generally we need that personal space to feel comfortable. And it varies person to person. But I know that's something that, a lot of offices stick to, everybody kind of having their space. That gets a little bit more murky in terms of direct support, where you may be entering someone's personal space more often to do activities of daily living. And I just want to make a note about that. The self-advocates that we work with are very, very passionate about being asked about things while they're happening, or being asked what their preferences are. So if you're supporting a self-advocate in toileting, changing, feeding, it is important to check in with the person and avoid having multiple conversations at the same time. So if you're focused on one individual, that's the best practice. You don't want to be on the cell phone or having a conversation with another staff member while you're supporting that person. And we hear that over and over again from self-advocates. Please respect me while you're with me. And that generally just shows respect. You're a professional, you're a direct support professional. So this is kind of the best way to handle that. Before you approach someone or touch them, like, is this okay? I'm going to, do this thing now. Is that okay with you? And again, when we're talking about boundary issues, we're generally all sharing space with someone else. And it's just critically important to make sure that we're establishing those boundaries, maintaining them. And when we're exploring the kind of new world for most of us of video conferencing, we're building in time for other people to also provide input. It may be tempting to kind of just say what you need to say, get through your report or get through an update, but you do want to build in pauses. You do want to build in time where people can provide feedback. And another big thing, while everybody is juggling so many different responsibilities, so many different things that are going on right now, personally and professionally, we're giving the coworkers that we work with the benefit of the doubt. Everybody, I think, is doing their best to maintain some sense of normalcy. But some people have turned into teachers, stay-at-home parents and teachers, and there's a lot to juggle. So again, it is critically important to set those boundaries at work and at home to differentiate between, okay, this is my professional time. This is when I have to be on professionally, but there is time for me to have me time and parenting time and time with the people who matter to me personally. It is okay to establish those boundaries, and it's critically important to set them and stick to them. And we're going to get into specifics on that in just a little bit. Another note about boundary crossing or boundary stepping. How do we know when it happens? We generally feel it. It feels uncomfortable. It may feel that we're a little threatened. It may feel that we're a little bit more reactive. We generally know when something makes us uncomfortable or something is said that is offensive. I think the best tip that I can share about boundary crossing would be to address the issue when it happens. So like we were talking about before, if someone says something that makes you uncomfortable, just say, I don't find that funny, or I'm not comfortable with this. Sometimes that's easier said than done if it's a large group setting. But certainly if the issue is one that violates a company policy or the law, even if we're working from home, even if we're doing remote work and how our work looks has changed, we want to make sure that we still feel comfortable reaching out to human resources or your designated agency rep if something does violate a company policy or the law. But again, it need not be an extensive conversation if it's something that's just, something like this that we were talking about before. If it's just kind of a minor boundary step, if you feel the need to express it, you can feel you should do that. Because I think the more that we practice setting those boundaries and expressing those boundaries explicitly, the easier it becomes. So we're going to move on to a discussion around setting expectations. I think that a lot is being expected of us right now. Some of us may feel that we're even more productive than we were in an office setting, working from home. Some of us feel, we might be pulled in so many different directions. It's still important to set the expectation that you're going to take care of yourself, even when you're busy, even when you're striving for the utmost productivity. You took breaks at work. You took time to get some fresh air or make a fresh cup of coffee or tea. Continue to do those things at home. Continue to do those things if your overall schedule has changed. Still build in those couple minutes to just get up and walk around your living room, stretch your legs, get outside for just a breath of fresh air. I think that it relates to, in order to take care of other people and really effectively support other people, it's important that we continue to take care of ourselves and we prioritize that. We're going to talk in depth about self-care later, but it is really, really important to stave off burnout, to stave off just feeling exhausted and unable to care for ourselves, especially if our jobs are to care for other people. It's important to build in that time. Another important tip that we want to share is plotting out your schedule. So as much as you can, look forward, look to next week and see what you want to accomplish. It's not always helpful just kind of just go day by day. Some of us feel like we're always putting out the fire, we're moving on from, crisis to crisis. But as much as we can, plot out our schedule and set a task list, a to-do list, and stick with it. For right now, especially when we may be sharing childcare responsibilities with a partner or family members, using a shared calendar app is kind of a really nice, quick way to keep everyone on track. So this is a live link. I should say when you see this color throughout the presentation, this kind of blue, it is a live link to something that we want to share, a resource we want to share. So this is a website that will detail a bunch of different calendar applications that you can add to your phone and share with a certain group of people. So if you're going to be on a webinar from 2 to 3, that means that you might not necessarily be able to walk the dog at that time or make lunch for the kids. So if your partner saw that on your calendar as busy, they may know that they have to step in. Certainly communication plays a big part, but the app can help as a reminder. Also, some of us may be feeling like we have a little bit more time in the morning. If you used to have an hour commute to work, how are you using that time? And I don't think that there should be any guilt associated with just sleeping in a little bit later than we normally would, or taking a nice long walk or an extended breakfast with one of our housemates. Generally, what are we doing to make sure that we're comfortable jumping into our day and facing the day? Okay, so remote work etiquette. Again, for a lot of us, this is a really new kind of reality. But a lot of the etiquette surrounding remote work is very similar to working in real life, working in an office setting or in a program setting. You want to make sure that you are punctual, be on time. And again, this is a live link. It's a fantastic article that builds in different tips for how to make sure that you're on time every time. That's not a guarantee, but some of what the article talks about is building in a 25% buffer. So, especially considering New Jersey traffic, we always want to build in an extra 20, 25 minutes to a commute. Nowadays, I think it's important to maybe take advantage of things like preparing for a meeting a couple of days in advance, or setting out the outfit we're going to wear the next day, the night before. There's other tips about setting our clocks ahead. But generally, I would encourage you to check this article out just because there's some kind of cool tips on how to be on time. You want to make sure that you're prepared. So just like you wouldn't walk into your conference room with no idea while you're meeting, you don't want to jump on a Zoom call if you're not really clear on what the objectives are. Again, if you're not clear on that, when you get the invite, it's okay to ask, hey, what are the main points we're going to be discussing? Is there anything that you need from me before the meeting? It's okay to ask those things. Your boss, your supervisor, and your coworkers want you to do well. They want you to be an effective team member. So always ask for clarity if there's any doubt. There's another article about presenting yourself as a professional. Your company may have dress codes in place that extend to remote work as well. If you have any doubt about that, I would just encourage you to check your company policy, different guidelines set forth by your company. But in general, when we're on camera, speaking to our bosses, coworkers, clients, family members, we want to make sure that we're presenting ourselves in the best light possible. Some people go with the business on top, party on the bottom, kind of like a suit jacket and PJ pants. Generally, it's finding out what works for you. Are you going to be able to be an effective professional if you're dressed in super comfy clothes? Many of us say, absolutely, it doesn't change the quality of my work. For some of you, you might say, actually, I really do need to go through the routine of getting out of bed, getting dressed, getting ready to present myself to the world as a professional. And it certainly does depend, again, on company policy and how do you want to present yourself to the person on the other side of the screen, with the idea in mind that you are representing your company. So you're representing a larger organization. That's something to really always keep in mind. And when we talk about kind of Zoom meetings, GoToWebinar, Google Hangouts, Google Meet, we have all these different ways to meet now. But we still want to make sure that we're being respectful of our coworker schedules. So if this webinar is scheduled to happen from 2 to 3 p.m., I promise you we're not going to be dragging it on until 3:30. That's why we have email. That's why we have different resource pages. We can certainly follow up with you after if it's a pressing concern. So respect people's time and respect people's schedules. Many of us find ourselves going back to back to back with Zoom meetings and calls and video chats. So it's just important to keep that in mind. Show respect to the people you work with, clients and coworkers, by sticking to a schedule. And be accessible. This is super critical. This is, again, a live link, different tips for programs that are accessible and work for a lot of folks with different disabilities. So I would encourage you to really check this out, jump into this a little bit more. Unfortunately, in 1 hour, we can't cover all of the different programs, but we're going to touch on some different accessibility points in just a bit. And I think patience is something to keep in mind when we're all kind of new to this world of remote work. So just try to be patient, try to take that extra breath before we jump into a Zoom call or a meeting. And this is something that my team and I take very seriously. When we're all working remotely, it's really critical to kind of publish your schedule. It shouldn't be a secret, it shouldn't be taboo. Make it known. So if your company uses a shared calendar app, make sure that your calendar is up to date and includes things like when you're going to be on lunch, or when you're going to make the grocery store run or the run to the pharmacy. Add those things in there. And it's also helpful if you kind of let your team know when you'd prefer to be reached out by text versus a phone call versus an email. Depending on the size of your team, that may make more sense. But I think the more communication, the better. People need to know where you're at to avoid crossing boundaries, right? If it's me time, you shouldn't be checking that inbox. You shouldn't be working. So I think it's important to express those things for the people we work with. Also, here's a link to use different privacy settings on specifically the Google Calendar. I think that's a really popular application that a lot of people use. Again, it is possible to share events with team members, coworkers, as well as people in your personal life. So there are different ways to kind of make things public versus private, to hide the guest list to certain events, and you might find that helpful. And certainly when we're going to be out of office for any period of time, any extended period of time, more than a couple hours or a day, it's really helpful to put the auto response away message on, also known as a vacation response. No need to get super in depth about where you're at, but it's generally helpful to include an alternate contact during that time and when they can expect a response from you. So all this talk about boundaries, why? Why are we dedicating time to this? Again, I think it's something that people do struggle with, to set clear and defined boundaries and stick with them. But ultimately, setting these boundaries and differentiating between this is time for me, this is time for my family and my loved ones, versus this is time for my work and my professional passions, it's important to kind of get to that point and be able to express those things. Because most of us are in it for the long haul. Our professional lives, this is not a sprint. We want to make sure that we're able to support the people that we are paid to support long term. And it's important to get to that place of an effective work-life balance. So another quick poll. Let me jump in here. We would super appreciate a response to this. I'm really curious to know how you would assess your current work-life balance. So I just launched the poll. If everybody could just take a minute, think about, the current work-life balance that you have. Are you happy with the amount of work time versus me time that you're experiencing? Are you sometimes okay with it, sometimes struggling? Or do you generally find that, no, I struggle to maintain that balance? I should mention this is totally anonymous. We won't know who responded and who did not. But just kind of for the sake of the rest of our discussion, I'd just be interested to know how you would assess your current work-life balance. I also wanted to thank the folks who have included questions and comments in the question box. I will make sure to address some of these questions toward the end of the presentation. But again, we do appreciate the feedback. All right, so we've got about a 67% participation rate. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to jump in. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Oops, 68, nice. Okay, we'll give it just a couple more seconds to make sure that you participate, okay? All right, awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm going to close the poll right now. So I'm going to share the results so you can all can see. So I'm happy to hear that, most of us are somewhere in the middle. Maybe sometimes we feel that we have an effective work-life balance. Sometimes we're struggling with it. I think that's super normal. And, hopefully as we go through the rest of the points in the discussion, you're going to walk away, you're going to take away that there are things that we can do that need not cost a lot of money, need not take a lot of time, that can help us kind of achieve a more defined work-life balance. And thanks to everybody who participated. All right. So well-being was a part of the title of this webinar. We're kind of working towards a greater sense of well-being, a greater sense of balance in our lives. The University of Pennsylvania has a lot of information about happiness. They've studied happiness, and they actually introduced a new theory of well-being. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And they kind of created a nice little acronym for it. So PERMA, which is the combination of kind of positive emotions, engagement, our relationships, as well as the meaning that we feel and the purpose that we feel in our lives, as well as our accomplishments. So they kind of see the combination of all these things and the balance of all these things as contributing to an overall sense of well-being. I personally would agree. I think this touches on a lot of the major points in life, the important things that we assign value to, our relationships, how we generally feel day to day, how engaged and active we feel in our work and in our purpose in life. And again, all of the links that are included are live. So if you clicked on them, they should open up in Safari or Google Chrome, depending on your browser. And we will be sending out a resources tab to everybody who participated later, so you can review all this information then as well. But generally, we kind of are striving for that balance between engagement and accomplishment, as well as the quality and kind of the relationships that we have in both our professional and personal lives. So when we talk about creating that balance, we're not talking about avoiding uncomfortable emotions. We're not talking about avoiding addressing the discomfort and addressing like how we might feel a little bit unbalanced sometimes. Because when we talked about boundaries before, certainly if we totally avoid discussing boundaries or pretend that boundary stepping didn't happen, that doesn't help us get to a better place. That doesn't help us feel more respected in our relationships or with our work. So it's kind of addressing these things and being vocal about them in all aspects of our lives, not just our personal lives with loved ones, but with our coworkers and colleagues as well. So I think that this quote kind of summed it up, what we're trying to get to, trying to build that resilience. That means that we're going to have the energy and the kind of mental mindset to go into our work during difficult times and still be able to support the people we need to support and do the things we need to do. So kind of just facing things head on. All right, we're going to dedicate a little bit of time to talking about Zoom. Hopefully everyone's familiar with it at this point, or have participated in some kind of Zoom conference call or meeting. Just a word about etiquette. So if you are the person responsible for scheduling a Zoom meeting, hopefully you're creating a very clear calendar invite for the people who are supposed to join that meeting. If it's not a calendar invite, make sure that you're sharing the link and the password to join the meeting in advance of the meeting and in one place. So don't text the link, but then email the password or, vice versa. So everything kind of in one place for people to access it. I would also encourage you to share any relevant information, resources, talking points with coworkers before the call. No one likes to feel unprepared. No one likes to feel like they're walking into a meeting and they're going to get blindsided. You want people to be comfortable with the conversation, comfortable with the discussion topic. So share that information and any expectations that you have before the call, at least a couple business days in advance, if not a full week before. Be sure to clear your desktop of any personal information before you share your screen. It's worth double checking. Sometimes photos or memes or different information crops up onto our desktop that we may not want to share with the entire world or our professional contacts. Also, keep in mind that folks can call into Zoom meetings as well as a video conference in. So there's those two options. For the folks who are on the phone, and they may be on the phone for a variety of reasons. Maybe their computer's not working as well, or they just don't have the space to create a video call at that moment. Make sure that those folks on the phone also have a chance to participate. So acknowledge them as part of the call and make sure that they are able to provide input throughout the call. And a general note about etiquette is if you wouldn't do it in real life, in person, don't do it online. I think that kind of sums it up. So when we're talking about Zoom, and I think this extends to other virtual meeting platforms as well, but Zoom fatigue is a thing. It's kind of been publicized. You may have heard of it. And again, it's this feeling of I'm going from one meeting to another, I'm always on camera. Some things that you might want to consider before you're establishing a Zoom meeting, maybe as a supervisor or as a coworker, is the video part of the meeting really necessary? Could you accomplish the work that you're going to do over a phone call instead? That's something for you to decide. And again, I guess it depends somewhat on your position within your organization, but just consider whether or not it's actually necessary. Because there is a performative element to being on the camera. Even if it's with coworkers we know and we're comfortable with, we want to make sure that we're conserving our energy for the tasks we need to do. And if the work can get done over a conference call or through a chain of emails, that's fine too. Give yourself a moment to breathe before you jump into the meeting. Make sure that you're building in that time, again, to take care of yourself. Even if it's just a minute to sit in silence, zone out for a minute before you jump in. That's totally fine. And do resist the urge to multitask. I'll say this again and again because I think at this point, some of us, that's our norm. We're always doing multiple things at one time, and it might feel a little strange to just focus on one thing. But test it out. The next time you're on a Zoom call, don't check your inbox. Don't check your phone. Try to kind of just put yourself in the space of focusing on that meeting. Also, choose speaker view. So you can, in that way, Zoom allows you to only see the person who is currently speaking versus the kind of wall of faces that some meetings come with. So if you'd prefer that, if you want to see everybody at one time, that's fine. Zoom will indicate who's speaking by putting a little box around that person's face. But if you choose speaker view, you're only going to see a photo of the person or a video of the person that's currently speaking. And it might help you feel a little less overwhelmed, but test it out. Also, it's okay to acknowledge the kind of newness, the discomfort, and unknowing that a lot of us are experiencing right now. You're not alone in that. A lot of people feel a little weird, a little awkward about all of the things that are happening, the new things that we're testing out, but we're kind of all in it together, and that brings a little bit of comfort, I think. Found another great infographic on bossedup.org. If we can, we're keeping our meetings brief. We're covering important, pertinent topics. And also, it's important, I think, again, to take the weekend off, right? Like if you have a Monday through Friday job, don't feel like you have to handle the work stuff on the weekend if that's not what works for you. So whether you're a boss or a support professional, an advocate, it's tempting. It's tempting to keep working. But in general, you want to give yourself that time. And also, it's okay to still take notes on paper and be able to reference that in a notebook versus keeping everything digitally. Mixing it up in that way kind of gives your eyes a break. If that's part of your organization system, go for that. So other things that I wanted to share about video conferencing, you want to consider your angle and lighting. Again, it's not, the fashion police aren't going to bust in, but you also do want to present yourself as a professional. And I have actually a still of a video that kind of works to clarify angle and lighting. So you want to make sure that your setup is generally on par, like on the same level as your face. It's not looking down at you. It's not looking up through your nostrils. You're kind of looking straight on. And this person kind of set up a little office filing system and put her laptop on top of that. If that works for you, you can test that out. And if you notice, she also has the lighting in the back of the camera or the laptop kind of shining on her. So that may help to make you look a little bit more alive and awake and alert. Also, and I thank you, Frankie, for doing this before, if there's technical difficulties, it's okay to say, hey, listen, just put a hand up or let me know if I cut out. The worst thing I think is giving an update, talking for a couple minutes, and then everybody's frozen and you're like, oh, okay. Like that was a waste of everybody's time. You want to make sure that there's a point person in the meeting who's willing to just express like, oh, actually we cut out at this point, or we missed this slide. Generally, we want to use the mute button when we are not speaking. That can help us avoid, different background sounds that we just don't want to share with the world. It is okay to test the features before a call or meeting. I know that my team and I tested out Zoom and GoToWebinar and the different features that are part of the control panels in both programs. And I think it helps to make everybody feel a little bit more comfortable before they're on and before the meeting goes live. If you can, use a headset. That generally helps to cut down on background noise, and if the headset, the mic is very close to your mouth, everybody can hear you a little bit better. And if there's other people in your shared living space, your workspace, they're not hearing the whole conversation that's happening on your meeting because it's going right into your ears. And again, I think speaking clearly, is something that speaking slowly, speaking clearly, and moderating our pauses is something that can be really helpful in a group setting. Also, if you can't seem to get a word in edgewise, there is the raise hand feature on both GoToWebinar as well as Zoom. So that may be a way to just, let the person who's running the meeting know that you've got something valuable you want to share. And I kind of culled a bunch of different tutorials about the most kind of popular video conferencing programs right now. So this is a live link to a Zoom tutorial, Google Meet, Hangouts Meet tutorial, and GoToMeeting and Ring Central Meetings. So I urge you to come back, check this out. This is a great resource. They were YouTube tutorials that really go through the main great parts of the different programs, and you can kind of figure out maybe which one will work best for you personally or professionally. So a word about kind of preparing your environment for work. Generally, if you can, keep it simple. Carve out a little space in your house. It could be a little corner of your living room or dining room or, finished basement, whatever the case is. And just make sure that your background is, again, reflective of a professional environment or as professional as possible. Generally avoid a bunch of posters on the wall or different distracting elements in the background. And I think this bears stating, you want to avoid meeting or otherwise bringing any type of work into your bedroom or bathroom. At this point, I'm sure we've all seen the horror stories online about maybe people forgetting that they're on camera or otherwise just not seeming to care that they're on camera. Remember, you're still at work. You still want to present yourself as a professional. If you're doing remote learning and distance teaching, training courses, you are the professional. Present yourself as such. And again, you don't have to get super fancy. You don't need a green screen, but avoid the digital backgrounds and things like that. The attention should be on you. And especially if we're working with people with disabilities who may have sensory issues and may be bothered by different, visual cues in the environment, reduce the distractions as much as you can. So I love this graphic because I think it sums up what maybe a lot of us are dealing with and working with. Generally, we're just trying to make the best of it. So as far as dress code goes, if there's not a clear policy, use your professional judgment. What works best for you? Do you have to get dressed up? Do you have to kind of get into that business casual mode before you go to work? If so, go for it. You could also do what the person in the illustration is doing. So they got their PJs on the bottom and then a nice blazer on top. it's really up to you. And I'm sure we can take a poll right now and figure out what kind of dress code people, prefer, but it might depend on the day. But also, I think when we're getting ready in the morning, it still is helpful to have something set aside so we can jump right into our outfit and get to work without spending that extra couple minutes kind of deciding how we're going to dress for that day or how we're going to present ourselves. But if your company does have a written policy, you do want to stick to that as much as you can and ask for clarity if you need it. And I'm sharing this just because I thought this was very cute. It's an illustrator named Tyler Fetter who drew herself. So this is part 3 of her work from home fashion series. Again, some of us might really identify with this. But in general, I hope that everybody's doing what works for them and what makes them feel most productive and comfortable in their at-home office. So when we talk about body language, specific to kind of work from home, remote work, people can still see you during video meetings. And I think that, statement of the obvious, I guess, but I think that it's easy to kind of get into the lull of, going from video meeting to video meeting. Still keep an eye on how you're presenting yourself. So use the preview screen before you jump into the Zoom call. I think that, it's just not professional to jump onto a call and then decide it's time to start fixing our hair or, fixing our tie, getting ready for the meeting in front of all of our coworkers and colleagues or clients. So use that preview option. It'll give you kind of a picture of yourself, what's in the background, pay attention to that, and adjust your screen as you need to. So as far as eye contact goes on video calls, if you're using the speaker option and you're only seeing the person who's talking, it may seem a little bit easier to kind of maintain that quote unquote eye contact. But generally, if you're on video for work purposes, you're behaving as if you're there in person. So you're nodding your head, you're making some motion that you're understanding what people are saying. Again, we are using the mute option when we're not talking, but it's still okay to just nod and kind of follow along. People generally know if you are distracted, if you have other things going on. Try to mitigate that as much as possible and avoid that multitasking. Just be there in the meeting, focus on that, concentrate on that. Just act as if you were meeting with that group in person. You wouldn't be on your phone, hopefully, if you were sitting at a conference table with everybody. So remain interested and engaged in the discussion, even if it's remote. Another note about working from home, we really wanted to express that when we're done working, it's your time. You need to jump into that time and kind of savor it. So for some of us, it does take switching gears a little bit. We're kind of moving from our professional to our personal lives. This is a little 5-minute self-care infographic that we found. And again, it doesn't have to take a ton of time to make that switch. Maybe after work, you always get up and make yourself a cup of tea or drink a glass of water or step outside. Do something that physically signifies I am done with work. For some of us, it is as simple as closing that laptop and putting it in a drawer, putting it out of sight. I think it's important to decide when you're done and stick with it. And that's kind of a cactus joke because they're in the background. But stick with your schedule. If you said you were going to be done at 5 p.m., be done at 5 p.m. Don't start getting into the thought process of, you know what, let me just send one more quick message. Let me just check my inbox really fast. That's generally the best or an easy way to spend a half hour responding to messages. So avoid doing that. Avoid continuing to work. We want to make sure that we're preserving that energy for our personal relationships and the people who are significant in our lives after work ends. Like I said, you might do your little mini commute. So leave your office space, leave that little corner of your living room and walk into another area of your home. Put the work away or out of sight. And if you need that extra push, ask someone in your life to enforce quitting time, like, okay, it's 5 o'clock. Remember, we were going to go outside. We're going to go hit a walk. Have someone keep you accountable. And when we're talking about productivity and kind of the era of COVID-19 and work from home, a thing that I like to do to manage my sense of productivity is to track accomplishments and track different tasks. So it helps me to write it down, because I think some of us end the day and say, like, oh my gosh, that day flew by. What did I even do? What happened? Keep track of it, add to it, and check back on it when you're having one of those days where you kind of don't feel like you were that productive. You can use different project and task management apps, another great resource here, and you can figure out which one works for you. You may have already be using one. Feel free to share that with other webinar listeners in the questions box. But generally, productivity does not happen from sitting in one place all day and not moving. It is helpful to kind of move around to get past that saturation point that researchers have found. Your attention can fade and you can feel kind of like flustered and kind of lost in the problem if you don't give yourself that time to step away and consider it. So it is really important to kind of tune out, step away, and then come back to a task. If it's a really complex, kind of difficult task, give yourself the time to work through it. And in doing some research for this webinar, I found that there is sort of a healthy level of stress. So we're kind of thinking about it in the Goldilocks analogy. We know that too much stress will cause us to burn out, get super stressed out, may prevent us from accomplishing our tasks. But if we don't have any push whatsoever, we could then struggle with motivation. Finding that healthy amount of motivation, the stress of an impending deadline may give us the push to get stuff done without feeling overwhelmed. But this comes with, again, setting those boundaries and deciding to ask for help when we need it. I think that's something that a lot of us might struggle with. But generally, when we give ourselves a reasonable deadline with enough support where we feel prepared for the task, we get there. And we might be motivated by, again, that stress of the impending deadline or the presentation. And just a note, I know we're just about out of time, but I did want to share this resource. This is all about positive psychology. Mindful.org is a great organization for promoting kind of positive feelings, promoting well-being. They came up with an infographic on RAIN, which is 4 steps to stop being so hard on ourselves. So when we're in a difficult situation, we want to remember RAIN. Recognize what's going on, acknowledge the experience, allow it to be. Where are you feeling it in your body? Where's it happening? Where are you feeling that stress or that sadness? And then being aware of it. And it's something like a moving meditation where we can just think of these things. We could do just the R part or just the A part. But it's kind of just paying attention to ourselves, and that awareness can help us gain a better sense of overall well-being. So there are definitely a lot of different ways that we've talked about kind of providing self-care, getting the sleep that we need, taking a moment to stretch or have a warm bath, staying connected with friends. But self-care is productivity. If we're filling our cup and giving ourselves the care that we need, we're going to be a better employee. We're going to be more effective at work. So take that time. And just as I wanted to note the JAN, the Job Accommodation Network. They have a great website specific to accommodations and different tips for telework for folks with disabilities. So feel free to check out this resource. They're a fantastic organization. And the ARC of New Jersey's Training and Consultation Services program, which provides training to employment professionals, created a great video. We're going to share a link to this video with a copy of the slides and resources page for everyone who attended today. So stay tuned for that. And just as a reminder, we do have 2 great webinars coming up. Next Tuesday, we're talking about small changes that can lead you to a healthier life. And on May 26th, let's stick together, navigating the web of online communications for staff and self-advocates. So we'll also share a link to the registration for those webinars in our follow-up email. So now I'd like to take just a couple minutes to address some of the questions that came in, and thank you for those. Let's see. All right. Okay. Oh, Erin, thanks for that tip. Google Keep is another great way to keep everything organized between groups of people. You can add different notes, photos, ideas, to-do lists, and share it amongst your team. Harry asked, what healthy coping skills do you suggest to help cope with the COVID-19 pandemic? Great question, Harry. I think that this is certainly, obviously a worldwide issue, a worldwide concern. And some of what we talked about today in terms of acknowledging these feelings, acknowledging the discomfort, but still making a decision to stay connected to the people in our lives that we care about. I think that's one of the strongest healthy coping skills that we can work into our daily lives. We can decide to reach out to people that matter to us and bring us comfort. We may also want to volunteer our time. That's something that a lot of people feel helps with during difficult times, just lending experience and lending your time. But in general, I hope that the tips for breathing through it, meditation, building some movement into your day are helpful. And I would urge you to check out our next webinar on small steps to gaining kind of a greater sense of well-being. I think that would be helpful. And thank you for pointing out the issue with the slides. I really appreciate that. It's really helpful to know. There is another question here. And thank you to all the DDD staff who joined us. That is fantastic. Yes, Lolita, we will be sending out a copy of the slides as a PDF along with the resources that we discussed. And if anybody had trouble clicking the links in the presentation, they will be in the resources section as well as on the slides. So thank you for asking that. Oh, great question, Stephanie. So why use a headset? In general, I find, again, that if we're in, say, a living room that's shared with one of our housemates or a spouse or children who are doing schoolwork, having the headset on with the earbuds, we're the only people in the room who are going to hear the discussion. And also, again, the mic is a little bit more concentrated towards your mouth. So people on the other end of the presentation or the meeting are going to be able to hear you a little bit better. I love seeing all the cats that come and wander into meetings. I'm fine with that. Yes, great question, James. James says that his monitor does not have a camera in it. Can he still be part of a Zoom session with audio only? Absolutely. You can choose audio only, or you can choose to call in to the Zoom meeting using a dial-in number. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Nicole. Fantastic. So that wraps it up. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please stay tuned for a survey about this webinar and more information about the resources we discussed in this webinar. So thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you can join us again next week for another installment of the Stay Healthy at Home webinar series. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.